Governance for a Beneficial Future. My name is David Wood, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. You'll hear shortly from each of our panelists, who represent a rich diversity of perspectives, skills, and subject matter expertise. But first, let me draw everyone's attention to next week's AGI 24 Technical Conference, which is running from Tuesday through Friday in Seattle. If you want to attend virtually, watching some or all of the many live streams from this conference, it's free and available globally, but you'll need to register in advance. I should also mention that immediately after today's panel conversation, audience members will have the opportunity to join one of a set of community roundtables in Zoom, hosted by the AI Ethics Work Group of the SingularityNET ambassadors, together with the BGI Collective, which was launched at the BGI Summit in Panama back in February. These sessions will discuss everything from building love into AGI to various aspects of collaborative governance. And one of these sessions will be in the Spanish language for those who are more comfortable like that. Look in the text chat for links for more details and where you can register and join these Zoom breakout room discussions. But before then, here are some of the key questions that I am looking forward to the panel exploring together in the next 80 minutes or so. Why do we need governance of AI systems? What might go wrong if there is no collaborative governance? If corporations and other organizations each just make their own decisions about developing and deploying new generations of AI systems? What might happen if these developers each just mark their own homework on meeting criteria for fairness, safety, reliability, and benevolence? If there are to be restraints on the way AI is developed and deployed, who will be making these decisions? And how will these decisions be monitored and enforced around the world? And how might AI itself help humans to design and operate wise collaborative governance systems? For his opening remarks, I was going to turn to Dr. Ben Goertzel. Ben has been slightly delayed, so instead I'm going to hand over to Dr. Anneloes Smitsman, who is the co-founder and CEO of EARTHwise Ventures. Elizabeth, the floor is yours.
I think you mean me, huh, Anneloes?
Anneloes, yes.
Yeah. No worries, that's fine. Great to be here with you all. And I was actually hoping to build on Ben's wonderful wisdom, but I'll be taking a deep dive in and also share some reflections with you, first of all, as I was preparing for this panel today on the very topic of governance.
Well, Ben has just joined us.
Yes, I'm sorry, Ben. Hey, perfect timing. Go ahead. I'll go second. You go.
Ben Goertzel is the CEO of SingularityNET, and he's going to kick us off.
Well, perhaps I am. So thank you, thank you, David. So I'm sort of the ringleader here. I've not been so involved in the organization of this particular shindig. So am I intended just to give an overall introduction to what the hell we're doing here? Is that right?
You can have 3 minutes to give you a basic.
3 minutes.
Do we need AGI
That's
governance?
exactly what I was looking for. So yeah, thanks a lot, David. So yeah, the theme we're here to address today is one of the most, if not the most, important themes on the planet today, which is how do we come together collectively to guide and govern the emerging general intelligence on the planet today. And so there's a couple premises underlying the hypothesis I've put forth, that this is such a super important topic. I mean, one is, I believe we're very close now to creating general intelligence, initially at roughly the human level, which is a complex thing to define. And then not too long after that, the super intelligent level, vastly more generally intelligent than humans. And I've talked and written a lot about how you would define these concepts. There's is some science there, though also some controversy. But on the whole, when I first started thinking this way in the early 70s, it was a weird outlier idea. When I got my PhD in the late 80s, it was a weird outlier idea. I mean, now you have CEOs of huge corporations, heads of state, and all sorts of random people taking seriously the notion that we could be years away from human level AGI, years to decades away from superhuman AI, right? So if we accept that premise that we may be close, there's another premise which I hold and would like others to seriously consider, that we'll be better off if the emerging AGI as we build it is developed based on the participation of a broad swath of the human species, many different human cultures, many different nations, many different industries. Now, this is not entirely obvious. I mean, the human species pisses me off a lot. There's a lot of idiotic things. There's a lot of things I disagree with out there. But this comes back to the quote from Winston Churchill, which I don't remember exactly, but roughly along the lines, democracy is the worst possible mode of governance, except for all the others we've ever tried, right? So, I mean, humanity is a big mess. We've got a lot of stupid ideas. We're fighting each other all the time. Still, there's a lot more understanding, a lot more wisdom, a lot more cognitive capability in a really broad swath of people than there is in any one guy, no matter how smart, or any one company or agency or something. So if we can figure out the right way to leverage broad-based collective intelligence toward driving the creation of AGI and ASI, I think the odds are high we'll be better off that way. And that's the main theme. And that then devolves into a very large number of particulars, right? And of course, I have my own approach on those particulars. I have my own preferred approach to building AGI, which is centered on the OpenCog Hyperon project, bringing together neural networks, logical reasoning systems, evolutionary learning systems. I have my own particular approach to building decentralized infrastructure so the AI can be run across a large number of machines, owned and controlled by a large number of different people, which is SingularityNET platform, recently merged into the larger Artificial Super Intelligence Alliance together with Fetch.ai and Ocean Protocol. And we have the chief founder of Ocean, Trent McConaughey here as well. So there's particular work on how to build AGI, how to decentralize AGI, how to create systems for voting, collective decision making, and so forth. And there's a lot of different approaches to all of these things. I'll say a little bit more about my own approach when I speak again later in this hour and a half. But mostly, what we're aiming to do in convening this gathering, I mean, we're aiming to help focus energies on this problem of collective governance, of how do we get a bunch of roughly like-minded people to come together to craft better ways to bring participatory decision-making to bear on the problem of how to best make ASI and AGI. And we talked about this a lot at the Beneficial General Intelligence conference that we had in February in Panama City. We'll have another BGI event next year, the date and place not yet determined. The AGI conference I want to bring people's attention to, which is not so much about these themes, but about, on a technical level, how do you actually build artificial general intelligence? So the AGI 24 conference is next week. if you're in Seattle area or can get here, please come. Otherwise, most of it will be streamed online as well. But that's next week. Part of the reason we decided to do this event now, because the AGI conference, we're focusing on technical stuff, which is very important. But I sort of wanted to frame it in this context of participatory collective decision making. Because if we get all the technical stuff right, but the collective decision making wrong, I mean, we could wind up with a very smart AI system, but not the kind that we want to have, right? And but it's still, I believe, we can't know for sure. Seems likely it's still largely in our hands now. Like my strong feeling and intuition is if we focus attention on collaborative governance of AGI systems at this point in 2024, we still have plenty of time to guide AGI development in a beneficial direction. And so with that, I will turn it over to Anneloes or whoever is next.
Anneloes, do you agree?
Oh, yes. And I'm glad Ben went first, because now I can build on the wisdom that he shared. Yes, I very much agree. The collaborative approach, participatory, inclusive, collaboratory approach is essential, not just in terms of how we steward, like to bring that kind of element into governance as stewardship, rather than governance only as regulation or a control mechanism. So I think we also have, if we want to achieve what Ben is saying, and not just create smart technology, but wise technology, and technology that is not just beneficial, but also benevolent, then it's also really important that we're entering into and co-creating a new paradigm of governance itself. Because if we're looking at a lot of the governance model and the governance institutions, they're still coming from an old control model. So this, when I was reflecting, and this is how we started earlier, reflecting on today, brought me back to my days in law school. And I remember when we had to read Locke and Hobbes as two different approaches in the making of governance and constitution and law and regulation. And one had a very optimistic approach of humans, that it's kind of okay. There is a basic trust in human nature. And the other had a very pessimistic view of humans, and that you had to control them and punish. And so what I find interesting, what's happening right now, or at least kind of in my observation or view on also the regulatory landscape around, especially narrow AI, because I don't think they fully understand even AGI, but is that we are still, and again, taking this constrictive approach, this fear-based approach, and this idea that we need to control it, and that governance is a mechanism to give us a sense of security. And if I just want to weave in some different governance perspectives, if we're taking in, for example, Nelson Mandela, a great statesman who understood governance as stewardship, he was saying, if you want to create safety in society, you need to empower people through education. So perhaps fundamental to creating safe, beneficial, and benevolent AGI is to have this large ecosystemic approach, which I think Ben also presents, and that is to really see what is the context within which the learning and development takes place of these AI becoming AGI systems and AGI prototypes, but then also everybody working towards that. So if you want to make that transition from knowledge to wisdom, it is essential that there is an ecosystem, therefore, of collaboration, that there is an ecosystem here that also incentivizes and makes it possible for people to participate, and most importantly, to learn together. And I think if we're now looking at a lot of technology that can learn, what are we feeding that? We're feeding that with sometimes the worst of our own behaviors and developmental disorders. So I think this is an incredible opportunity to embrace governance really from a perspective of stewardship, and instead of focusing on risk mitigation and security, but to really focus on the maturation also of our species, and to really seeing therefore what is it that we together also need to learn and have a different approach to all the things that we are afraid of or that we consider as risks, and transform those into opportunities to go really for the deep growth that is required, that future generations ask of us required. It's this, in fact, it's the same learning that's required if we want to go towards a thrivable and regenerative world and future. This is, I see there's an amazing opportunity. So yes.
So lots of points there that would be great to dive into more fully, but let's move on around the panel. Let's hear now from Elizabeth Shaw, Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, who is the founder of 1000 Black Voices. Elizabeth. Not hearing from Elizabeth. We had a little technical glitch earlier. Let's, in that case, we'll come back to Elizabeth soon. I'm going to suggest we now move to listen to Dr. Gabriel Axel Montes, who is the founder of Neural Axis. Gabriel, do you agree with what you've heard? Or do you have different perspectives you'd like to share?
Yes, thank you. Great remarks so far. I largely agree. My background is as a cognitive neuroscientist, and with a enthusiasm for non-ordinary modes of human cognition and things like that. So I like looking at it from the vantage point of what are the kinds of cognition that AGI and ASI might have, and the sorts of values and psychosocial modes of organization that might spring out of that. And we can only speculate, but we can make somewhat educated speculations upon that. So upon AI governance, I think we should have as much thoughtfulness and governing AI and bringing our best foot forward as much as possible before AGI quite possibly starts to govern us. And then hopefully we co-govern alongside it. So we're in a pretty special period right now where we can start iterating and have participatory forms of governance and hope to have some effect on how we interact with AGI and how it perceives us. I think one of the biggest challenges at present is the perspective of where governance is being conceived from, which basically means where we're operating from as human beings. So it's kind of a matter of our internal software, if you will, individually and collectively. So, AGI and ASI will have there's Elizabeth coming in. There's two of us coming up, speaking in parallel dimensions, I think.
Just continue, please, Gabriel. Elizabeth is coming in asynchronously with a slow connection.
Sure. So basically, AGI and ASI will have implications beyond the conceptualization ability of most people, and likely those at the helm of large current institutions in their current form. I think one thing that keeps us inflexible, that I think AGI and ASI will blaze past, is the fact that we as human beings, that we have this part of us, this convention that leads with certain preconceptions and biases that are basically built on our evolution as a species, our nervous system and our biology and the emotions and cognitive scaffolding that happens on top of that. And AGI and ASI will learn from that. And it will also learn completely different modes of being that have very little relationship with that. So this state of ours as human beings is not fixed, but it's a long transgenerational habit that has served our evolutionary momentum so far in the pre-singularity era, but it's not suited for the kind of reset that's required to handle ourselves in the governance process for the age of AGI and ASI implementation. So I would like to say that instead, there's a part of us that's not too widely explored. It's really an entire realm. It's not a small part. That is really good at being in a cognitive, emotional sort of still point of sort of deep, open neutrality, that one where we are able to be open to the subtleties of emergence. So, and emergent processes that will be required for AI governance, which will be extremely rapid. Hopefully, if we can do anything about the speed of it. So if we can deliberately retreat into the space of holding an open question, there's actually a suppleness that is actually quite strong and capable. And from here, we can probably listen to the cues of where we can go individually and collectively as a species in this new era, and then swarm enter like a rapid swarming, a very agile swarming process together. This will create a sort of nimbleness that's beyond our current focus on linear rational thought. And we can still operate rationally, but that only becomes one element of numerous. So with this kind of capital N neutrality, this kind of state that we can embody as a trade, I think we will be able to lean more into a new kind of momentum we won't necessarily need a fear of falling over, which is usually where we come from when we're operating from, self-interest and zero-sum dynamics. And if we did fall forward, the collective mode aided by AI agents, hopefully serving our ultimate well-being, will facilitate a swift recovery and continuation. So I think that this is mission critical. ASI and AGI will be light years cognitively ahead of us, with psychosocial systems potentially beyond what we can imagine now. So that's a known unknown, and of course there's unknown unknowns. So if we take a game theoretical approach that we've been using since our origins and zero sum, I think this will go really slow and painful. I think if we can retreat into the part of us that can operate in a more emergent, intuitive, very fast manner, and our cognition can sort of sidecar along that rather than trying to operate on our biases and preconceptions, I think this will go much more smoothly, and ASI AGI will be a sort of eventual comrade and successor that will be worthy of a name.
Lots to think about there too. We'll come back to many of these questions. We'll see to what extent people agree or want to build on that or offer different perspectives. But now I'd like to pass the mic to Dr. Trent McGonigal, who is the founder of Ocean Protocol. Now, Trent will be well known to many on this call, but others may know less about him. So Trent, I'd ask if you can introduce yourself and then give your thoughts on the questions of the panel.
Hi there. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And yeah, I will offer probably a different perspective than the others, but in some ways complementary. By background, I'm trained as an electrical engineer and computer scientist. I've been doing AI professionally since the late 1990s, first with Canada's Department of National Defense, and then for 15 or 20 years using designing AI algorithms at scale for driving Moore's Law and semiconductor chip design. And for the last 10 years, I've been doing blockchain and AI, most notably with Ocean Protocol. And these days also collaborating with Ben from the side of ASI Alliance, which is a particular approach to coordinating the incentives of multiple token projects. So that's my background. I'm a hardcore technologist. I love to build, and I think a lot about AI and creativity and so on. And in my background, I've done a lot of work on analog circuit design, as well as creative AI. So a lot of these questions that me and my friends were hanging out in the late 90s and early 2000s, it's kind of neat to see now the mainstream is talking about a lot, just like Ben had alluded to. So now also going back historically, going back, to the 50s and even earlier, if you ask some people, but market for, we've been seeing the compute power of computers rise exponentially for decades, right? So we've seen that it's, the compute for AI training, from the time that AI systems were first starting to be built in very basic ways in the late 50s till now, we've seen 22 orders of magnitude improvement, right? It was always exponential. So we went from about 1e to the 4 flops in the 1950s to 1e to the 24 flops these days. Compare that to a human. A human has 20 petaflops, or 1e to the 14 flops. That's 10 trillion flops. We surpassed that in 2008. So it's been 15 years since AI training systems have surpassed human level compute. And of course, there's different ways to measure, but we've already gone another eight orders of magnitude beyond what human level compute is with the 100 billion neurons in our brain, et cetera. Why has this been happening? Because money. Because there's a ton of money to be made in AI. For years and years and years, it was in narrow AI, The company, I started 2 companies doing narrow AI for chip design. We didn't even say the word AI to our customers because, there had been this AI bubble in the 80s, and then that bubble burst in the early 90s. And so AI was kind of a swear word. So we didn't talk about AI that much publicly in the company, even though we talked about it all the time inside the company. And of course, these days, we have a new AI bubble, and there's a lot of money being made, a lot of new money being made, et cetera. So there's this huge market force to drive AI compute up higher and higher and higher and higher, right? And so now we have a lot of compute. We have, basically 10 million times more compute than we have than a single human, to give you a comparison. Why does this matter? Because all the money that is being made and all this opportunity for money to be made in the future means that there continues to be piles of money being thrown into this to make AI grow faster and faster. And we're seeing these days about a 10x every single year. Some of that is from Moore's law and systems around. That's about 3.3x of it. And some of it is in improvements in the AI algorithms and everything around, right? So every year, another order of magnitude improvement, right? And so typical estimates for hitting AGI are, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but not further, right? And that's for, human computers at roughly par with humans. Once we hit AGI, then, another 10x or 1000x, we'll blow past the AGI and get to ASI and, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, right? So we're talking 6 years, 7 years until we hit ASI, artificial superintelligence, right? And this isn't slowing down. There's money to be made, but also importantly, it is imperative from a national defense perspective. So you can frame it as a race between OpenAI and cloud and the others, or you can frame it as a race ultimately between USA and China. Europe has kind of, knocked itself out of the picture with its over-governance of AI, and that's a whole story on its own. But what this means is we have this arms race among companies or among nations in the near term, and it's going to keep going, right? It's not going to stop as soon as we hit AGI. It's going to keep going. And then we're going to have these compute systems where one compute system is 1,000 times smarter than a human, then 1,000,000 times and more, right? So let's just keep that as a statement. So as soon as 6 years, we will have compute systems that are 1,000,000 times, potentially 1,000,000 times smarter than humans. If not 6 years, 10 years, whatever. Okay. Now let's put a pin on that for a second and ask, imagine ants, like these insects, and imagine if a bunch of ants came up to you, humans, and said, "Dear humans, we would like you to govern us. Dear humans, we would like you to have ant values, please. So we would like to govern you. We would like to constrain you towards ant values." Would we follow that? No, right? We might ignore them, or if they start to pester us and crawl up our legs and stuff, we might start stomping on them or something, right? This idea that we can somehow govern entities 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000 times smarter than us seems it's a huge stretch. I don't actually see how it's even feasible to think about. However, when we say we, what does it mean to be human, right? These AIs are getting more and more intelligence on the back of silicon, Moore's law. And there's nothing stopping we as humans, taking the next step in evolution, if you will, to augment ourselves, to enhance our own cognitive abilities, to be competitive with AGIs and ASIs especially. And you can view it, a lot of the discussion so far has been around alignment. So imagine we have these, think of it like a small coprocessor to our human meatbag brain to start with. And it starts off pretty small, but then it has this brain-computer interface with massive feedback back and forth between our human brain, our meatbag brain, and this coprocessor that's silicon-based. And it's being aligned all the time. So you've got this silicon consciousness that is really part of you. We are natural-born cyborgs as humans, and as we crank up the compute power of that coprocessor, it is still a part of us. And we don't even need that high of bit rates. Just like our left brain to the right brain is connected only by the corpus callosum, which is quite a small bit rate, on the order of old-school modems. We can have a similar level bit rate, maybe more if we want, to these silicon coprocessors. So I see that as a path, and what this could unlock eventually is, humanity going to the next level. We exploring the stars, exploring the cosmos, building Dyson spheres, all of this, right? We shouldn't assume that our carbon-based bodies that have evolved from apes, that we shouldn't assume that is the apex of evolution. So what is it that we want next as humanity? And I see, so there's sort of a stick to avoid, which is accidentally losing control to ASIs, which we don't have a guarantee that they'll be beneficial to us. So that's the thing to avoid. But the thing to go for, the towards thing, is let's explore the stars. Let's reshape the cosmos. And then to get there, what we really need to do is catalyze all the work on brain-computer interfaces to catalyze human superintelligence. So right now we're on a big race to artificial superintelligence. We need an equally great race to human superintelligence. And the role that governments can play, et cetera, is help get out of the way, help come up with regulations that catalyze this race, because this is the race that actually matters.
Wow, lots of interesting points there. I'm going to hand back to Dr. Elizabeth Shaw, the founder of 1000 Black Voices. Elizabeth, are you inspired by the vision of exploring the stars and reshaping the cosmos? Do you have other perspectives you want to bring to the conversation?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's great to be here and share thoughts. And of course, it's stepping, essentially, yes, we need to think about change. That's so very important. And of course, as change happens, we are, I suppose, afraid sometimes of change. And so there are lots of different perspectives to consider in all of this. And there are both challenges and opportunities that come with developing beneficial general intelligence. It's, really imperative that we not only pose thought-provoking questions and thoughts as we are, but also seek actionable solutions that promote this, ethical behavior and responsible development. And that's why we're here. First of all, I must say hats off to SingularityNET for fostering this community, this environment where we can actually work for AGI that's truly beneficial to humanity. And as it transforms the way we work, interact and process information, which we've just heard about, that is coming. Those kind of approaches to how we're evolving is coming. But we have values, we have ethics, we have rules to shape how we interact. And this is no different in the social world as it is in the world of AI. I suppose in the social world, it stands at the moment, we have rules of ethics, regulation for health and safety. We have, insurance for our cars, for example. We've got insurance for our professional conduct. How do we do business? We've got examples of insurance for that to support us. But following on from laws and regulation for, compliance and values and ethical guidance as a moral compass, this helps create trust and confidence in society, all of this that I've just mentioned. And so in the world of AI, we're developing rules of ethics. We're thinking about fairness, accountability, transparency. Well, let's call this health and safety insurance for AI development, right? AI development, engagement with AI models. How do we create trust and confidence in AI technologies as we have in our social world? And, humanity is complex. I believe, it's really important to have this multi-perspective approach. And this is needed in how we develop these rules of engagement with AI. And Ben had mentioned it really from the get-go. He mentioned, I've made a note, many different nations, many different people need to be involved in this conversation, in this drive for outcomes and action. And so like SingularityNET, I bring people together to have these discussions. And for me, it's about outcomes and actions, like I've just mentioned. So through 1000 Black Voices, we're bringing together an inclusive global community from founders to corporations, investors, governments, with our ethical AI initiative, which is exploring what is needed, how we bring this multi-perspective approach in how we collaborate, how we educate. And there's been conversation about education being so very important, and it is, and how we stand together in shaping the future of, BGI. And so, as we continue this conversation on this panel, I'll share some of what we've been discussing, though I guess as a taster, how do we reconcile an ethical focus with this huge, fast pace of innovation that's going on? Or should I put it a different way? how do we ensure innovation and commercialization doesn't outweigh ethical considerations? Because, you know, we're finding some of that kind of in our conversations that generally ethical considerations are sort of way down the list of considerations for corporates when we're considering technological developments and adoption of these. So that's something that, you know, we want to unpick a bit more probably in some of the roundtables. But just at this point, I think just I'd like to just highlight that, of course, there is this need for ethical frameworks that are really embedded in throughout the whole process of innovative thinking. You know, so from our cultural expressions, every phase of our dev through to practical application, we need to think about how we do this, you bring this in. And there are a few organizations that are providing ethical guidelines. Of course, SingularityNET are building and have built theirs, and it's important to consider. And before I hand back, it's really, I'd like, you know, engagement, of course, with participants. And, you know, if you'd like to share in the chat any programs that you've been involved in around ethical guidelines, or whether you find them useful, that'd be useful for me also to you know, as a reference point. So yeah, thank you very much.
So you had one invitation there, put some thoughts in the chat, and the panelists will be responding in due course to anything they see in the chat that particularly inspires a reflection. But there's another invitation, which is, in case you missed it at the beginning, there is a chance to actually all get involved in a roundtable conversation in which all voices will be heard in Zoom meetings taking place immediately after this. And to find out about them, look at the pinned message in wherever you're watching this from. Now, finally, in this opening round of remarks, before each panelist responds to what they've already heard, let's pass the mic to Dr. Scott L. David, who is the sponsor for AGI 24 at the University of Washington and also the Executive Director of Information Risk and Synthetic Intelligence Research Initiative at the University of Washington. Scott.
Thanks so much. You know, before we got on the call, we were chatting among the panelists, and I said they were all my new best friends. And so, you know, it's beautiful what's happening here. This is not just a call for action. This is action. This is, we're thinking together. We're synthesizing our intelligences right here. And so congratulations to the organizations involved for coming together. It's beautiful. I want to talk a little bit about lawyers. I'm a lawyer for 30 years now. I'm at the Applied Physics Lab for 12 years. Where lawyers are behavioral systems engineers. We open up dimensions by disambiguating language. And the exponential increase in interactions and information has, that Trent alluded to, has created huge ambiguities with our existing narratives and existing institutions. And that's good news if you are able to structure the disambiguation. So my task in this, I consider, is to make things boring. And by boring, I mean reliable and predictable. When you talk about governance, we're trying to do that. In a time of exponential change, human control is not possible, as has been alluded to before. And so how do we build surfboards? The disruption has happened. How do we re-intermediate in a way that humans can remain relevant? And Elie Wiesel, the author, said the opposite of beauty is not ugliness, but irrelevance and indifference. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, to humans is whether we remain relevant and whether there's indifference of other intelligent systems to who we are and have been. So what I want to talk about, three things. I want to talk about what is governance. I want to talk about how we do governance and how do we incentivize participation in governance. So I'm going to do the boring stuff. That's the background, not the AI specific stuff. I look at AI as just an instance of information risk in a long trend of this. And we haven't even dealt with the earlier things like the internet and GDPR and blah, 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 haven't really dealt with it. Okay. So what is governance? I'm going to suggest that governance is a time machine. How do we do governance? I'm going to suggest that all governance is from community practice. And how do we incentivize participation? I'm going to suggest that all participation in all human governance through history has been through de-risking and leveraging in ways that no individual can do alone, period. So those are the three big things. So let's do it. What is governance? This will just take a minute or two. What is governance? Again, it's a time machine. We render future behaviors of others more predictable. So when you guys drove around today to your respective offices, did you send around a memo saying, let's all stop on the red light? No, you didn't have to. Why? It's already out there. Everyone knows red means stop around the world. Could be purple means stop. It's not the light that stops the car. It's the agreement of the narrative that red means stop. That's a shared narrative. Okay. So governance is rulemaking, operations, and enforcement. The rule is red means stop. There's the rule. We teach it in schools and you enforce it with police, and you have technologies and lights that stop them from being green on two sides. So all governance, whenever somebody says we need governance, ask them, what's the rulemaking? What's the operation under the rules? And what's the enforcement? They can be outsourced, et cetera. A lot to talk about there. The other thing is that governance isn't just in governments. We have governance across business, operating, legal, technical, and social domains. We call that bolts in our research. Business, operating, legal, technical, social. So you got technical requirements and specs are governance documents. Legal requirements are governance documents. Social norms are governance. There are all different kinds of enforcement, but there's rulemaking, different kinds of convening that happens, different kind of enforcement, different kind of operations. Then the last point on what is governance is among people. So, and like ethics is rules on people about people. Now, it's also about whether you eat animals and all sorts of things like that. But the idea is that we're talking about governance of AI. What we really mean often is governance of ourselves vis-a-vis AI at present, because at present, governments and governance systems are not willing to grant that AI could have discretion such that it needs to be governed. So that's at present. And who knows in the future, probably will change. But so governance property is not our relationship to a piece of property. It's a relationship to each other vis-a-vis the property. And so governance, time machine, rulemaking, operations, and enforcement across bolts, and it's among people. Okay, how do we do governance? All governance, all institutions arise from practices. And so how do we get the practices? You ask communities. And the basic idea here is that there's lots and lots and lots of ways to do governance before you get to regulation. And I'm going to go through this. I'm going to say this really quickly, but it's something we can develop later. You can intervene at the following. Any community has thoughts, they have aspirations, they have expectations, they have rights, there's duties, there's breach, there's causation, there's damages, there's liability, there's insurance, there's reinsurance, there's securitization, there's financialization. All of that happens prior to regulation happening. All of those interventions can be explored as being efficacious when you have a challenge, AI being one of those challenges. So we need to explore all those, because it may be that one of those is more stable and we can build off the thing that's stable. Last point, how do we incentivize participation? Eukaryotes arose, mitochondria and chloroplasts arose because organisms in nature, the biophysics of it was such that it was a better deal to get on board with another organism. What I'm suggesting is we need eukaryotic governance along lines, I think, of what Trent and others are suggesting, that we need to essentially hybridize with these other forms of intelligence and get on board with each other. And that allows us to de-risk in ways we couldn't do alone. Right now on your floor where you're sitting, there's bacteria looking up at us as eukaryotes saying, whoa, that's a good deal. I wish I could get a piece of that action. So the bacteria that we need to think in those ways of maximizing leverage in order to remain relevant and continue to be more beautiful all the time. Last point, we're in the steep part of the exponential curve now. And one way to look at AI evolution at this point in this transition is to look at the early period of corporations before, when they were just grants from royalty, prior to the time that they were given legal personhood that was independent. Again, legal personhood is not the be all and end all, but it's a way for humans to historically have interacted with things. And so it may be that we'll see legal personhood like you're seeing in Ecuador, I think, or Uruguay with rivers and other things where personhood is granted to things that aren't human type things. And that will allow us to interact in a different way. And again, a lot of different concepts in there. We'll have a chance to develop it later, but I'm thrilled to be developing with this group. So thanks so much for inviting me. And that's it for me. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Scott. Lots of fascinating points there too. So on the subject of exponential speed ups, I'm going to request that each of the panelists exponentially speed up their replies for the second round, and otherwise we'll only have one more round of conversation. I'd like to give each of you the microphone at least twice before we finish. I invite each of you, as we go around the second time, either to comment on something you've heard already or pick a question from the good set. I'm going to comment on something that was said by a professor of logic. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. I hear from the speakers lots of ideas that if we have these good intentions, we will be able to create a beneficial superintelligence. If we have sufficient collaboration, sufficient respect for emergence, sufficient nimbleness, and if we avoid traps like linearness and arrogance and racing all by itself. But what happens to the people who don't buy into these values? What happens to the military groups? What happens to some of the smaller corporations who've got their own determined vision? How will our good intentions somehow convert their less thoughtful intentions and stop them creating dangerous systems that will cause problems in the world well before they get to superintelligence and before the kind of beneficial superintelligence you've all spoke about comes about? So that's my question, which I'll add to the mix. But Ben, I'm sure you've got other things you'd like to talk about. Back to you, Ben Goertzel. Can't hear you. So I'm not hearing you, Ben.
Now is all right?
Super.
All right, yeah, so I think for a brief remark, I'm going to take the professor of logic's question in the chat. Beneficial for who? There are things that seem great to certain people and awful to others. And I think that this is an interesting problem because I think it's one that seems more acute to us now than it's going to seem in a post-singularity scenario. I think that the economy of scarcity presents us with a lot of compromises and collisions that will not be there once we've made the shift to an economy of abundance. And it's interesting to think about what difficult issues of this nature will remain once you have a real economy of abundance, where you have molecular nano assemblers that can build us whatever stuff we want at the human scale. Once we can modify our minds in accordance with our desires. I mean, there will be a level of physical resources that still require contention. Like if you want to take all the molecules in Jupiter and turn them into a supercomputer, I mean, there's not that many Jupiters around unless we go way beyond physics as we know it. Now, that whether money will be the right way to deal with that sort of issue, I doubt, but it's a collective governance issue, right? And I don't think you'll have to argue about resources for getting a car or a computer or taking a trip or something, but there's a certain level where you would. There's social and cultural issues, like, at what age do you let kids make their own decisions? Is it 10 years old, 2 years old, 18 years old, 21 years old? At what age do you let your kid decide to refactor their brain into a different kind of computing system, let alone reassign their gender? And these are sort of cultural value issues that each human community may need to make on its own, even after you have superhuman AGIs. More frustratingly, you have cases where some groups of humans just want to dictate what other groups of humans are allowed to do, right? Which exists on the world today, here and there. Like you have a holy war of one group who thinks who another group is living is immoral, right? And or one group thinks A thinks B is coercing C into something. B and C don't say so, right? So I mean, all problems don't go away, but I think a lot of problems go away once you move from from scarcity into abundance. And I know, David, you've thought and written a bunch on this also. I think, however, a more acute problem is the transition from the current realm of scarcity into the realm of abundance. And even though I'm an optimist that we can get to a realm of abundance where humans can have way better lives than most people now consider possible, including the potential to transcend the human condition and fuse with transhuman minds and all that, I don't think it's at all obvious that the transition to this realm of abundance will be smooth. And I think this is really a large part of why we need really good collaborative guidance and governance of the path to AGI. And this is going to be a big theme at the next BGI event and in further discussions online in this series before that.
So governance of superintelligence is sort of not really feasible, but what we do need to focus on is governance of the transition to superintelligence, governance of this crazy period when more and more people will be frightened and horrified, and some will be excited in all kinds of different ways. Next, Anneloes.
Thank you. Wow, this is such a great conversation. I just want to respond a little bit. I think it was William. He put in the chat that there are billions of people not even aware, of the conversation. I think that's a really good comment. And this is also why I appreciate very much what SingularityNET is doing, bringing us together here as a community to open up that conversation. I think that is so true. So I think we always need to kind of check our assumptions when we're talking about inclusiveness, participatory decision-making. What is the effort that we all need to make to actually the people are also on the street, where I live in Mauritius, this is where I'm calling from right now. It's a small island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. I think most of the people here have no clue, they'll be listening in, they'll go, what is this about? So what does that mean with technology that is exponentially transforming our lives, our world, and our future? And there's still so many people who, even if you give them the right or the opportunity to participate in decision making, how do we empower that decision making? So that's one reflection. And the other reflection is that time machine that Scott was talking about. I like that very much. So imagine that we're going actually into that time machine, and instead of us focusing on this governance of ASI or AGI, indeed that impossibility, how would it look like to have a governance intelligence, a governance wisdom? And imagine for a moment that AGI and then ASI is actually able to do what we as humans have failed to do. And that's actually because of its complexity, because of the multitudes of networks, interdependencies, and connections, that out of that perhaps can emerge a more unified understanding of the value of life, the prioritizations of life. So how would it actually look that if we, instead of trying to focus on the governance of AGI, actually spearheading an AGI governance that can then assist and co-steward with us as humans for the greatest challenges of our world.
Thanks, Anneloes. Next, let's hear again from Gabriel. Thanks, Anneloes.
Yeah, excellent discussion. A lot of great themes. I think something that comes to mind is the illusion of governance and control, which is something that was mentioned in the comments as well. Dropping the illusion of control. So kind of, yes, governing the transition, and also really there's a point where I think the governance effort is going to turn to therapy. We're going to be talking about and exploring what it means to be human at some point, more than we recognize right now. And that's going to be important as well. There's kind of autogenic benefits from just kind of reflecting with each other at a different level about things that we are not able to control. at the same level we've been used to. So that's crucial. And I think just being open to where governance is going and may go is also really crucial. So the participatory approach is key. With a background in neuroscience, it's great to hear the interest in brain-computer interfaces, brain-machine interfaces, which Trent mentioned. There is also mentioned in the comments, there is a that BMIs or BCIs may not even be necessary. And it's possible that a very advanced AGIs or ASIs will be able to just read every single human behavioral cue and deeply infer what there is to know about a person. And it'll be there's a lot in between that, and to see what the AGI or ASI can actually do, given its information, how deep it wants to go to perceive us. There's also other forms of BMIs that we don't really yet have conceived. So, we're looking at brainwaves. There's ultrasound to kind of close the feedback loop. There's some research on bioelectricity that's coming out from Michael Levin's lab. There's also things like asking, how does a 3D unfoldment of our brain actually contribute to our unique form of cognition versus a silicon chip and kind of planar organized server farms and chip architectures? How does that, the 3D unfoldment of the brain, does that actually result in electromagnetic fields that then have compounding effects? Are the things we haven't even looked at yet, scalar wave dynamics and things that will eventually, someone will have the bright idea to explore those things. I don't know how fast any of that will be compared to what ASI can infer. That said, it'll be a fun sort of set of accoutrements and ways to interface with AGI and ASI. As for, let me pause there and just kind of end on that theme and pass it on.
Well, thanks for pausing, because that means we'll have more time to keep the conversation going. Trent, what would you like to continue with?
Thanks. Actually, it's great to hear that many of you have dovetailed in my discussion on the brain-computer interfaces, the mergers, and so on. And one of the comments, someone had said something along the lines of, it's important to acknowledge that ASI is inevitable, acceptance of that ASI is coming, right? And a good way of thinking about this too is that there's this thing called the 6 stages of grief and finding meaning, right? If a close relative dies or something like that. But it's actually, you can apply this logic to each human when it comes to this idea that there's going to be intelligences that are 1,000 times smarter than us, right? And of those stages, stage 1 is denial, saying it's never going to happen. Stage 2 is anger, getting angry about it. Stage 3, bargaining, trying to weasel your way out of it, that it's maybe not going to happen. Stage 4, depression. Stage 5, acceptance. Stage 6, finding meaning, right? So there's actually several things that it would be very, very helpful if humanity got to acceptance on these things, because it's going to happen. Purely from logic, right? USA and China aren't going to slow down the same way that they, nuclear proliferation is, they won't stop nuclear bomb making simply because it's in terms of the game theory of it, it just doesn't make sense, right? And money can be made from the corporation. So we have to accept that ASI is coming. We have to accept that there's going to be these entities that are 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times smarter than meatbag humans. And we have to accept that just like the ants can't govern us, we can't govern these intelligences 1,000 times or 1,000,000 times smarter than us, right? So once we get to that level of acceptance, go through all the stages of denial and grief and so on, we get to acceptance. Then we ask, what can we do about this, right? And then, how, and it's also useful to understand if we don't do anything about it, or if we lose the race, in 20 years and 100 years, there's going to be all these patterns of intelligences out there in the world, or 500 years. And they're going, for sure, there's going to be a bunch of them that are purely AI derived without any human provenance. But it's my hope that, in 20 years or 500 years, that at least some of those patterns of intelligence have some human provenance, right? So it would be fun if the current brain patterns in our brains and of our children, etc., do make it into that future. It would be fun to have that adventure to explore and reshape the cosmos. We have no guarantee, right? And then we can ask ourselves, okay, well, how do we help insert ourselves into that future, and what future do we want, right, to explore and reshape the cosmos, or whatever we want to do, right? And that's the main question to ask. So it comes down to right now, ASI, these entities that are 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times smarter than humans, it's inevitable. The only question is, can we get to HSI in order to play ball with them? HSI as in human superintelligence. So artificial superintelligence is inevitable. Let's identify strategies and tactics to maximize the chance of human superintelligence. And governance could play a role, and there's a bunch of other possible tools too. I've talked about brain-machine interfaces. There's uploads that seems far away now, but you never know. We'll see. But these are all the things this is the discussion we should be having, rather than hoping that some hugs are going to make things better and somehow ASI is not going to happen.
So hugs won't be enough to make it happen. What do we need to make it happen? We've talked about collaboration. Does that mean direct democracy? Does it mean learning from the ancient wisdom? Elizabeth, what would you like to continue the conversation with?
Yeah, thank you there, David. Well, it's picking up on something Ben said earlier. He talked about the realm of abundance. And I'd like to link that to open source and also the conversation around, people doing harm, perhaps, because they have access to open source in a sense. So open source is there to, support individuals with innovation, but also thinking about, accessibility. And there's this dilemma going on at the moment around ethics and intellectual property and what that looks like. So there are challenges around, how do we manage this? Is there going to be ethical open source licensing, or, what kind of security measures are going to be put in place to ensure that people, it's not misused? What are the vulnerabilities around it? And also as a community, what kind of community governance would be associated with this? So there are lots of different platforms, lots of different conversations. I'm not here to say that I have the answers. I don't. And this is why we have a community of individuals coming together to have conversations about a whole range of different things to try and move things forward. So just wanted to put that in place. But of course, also wanted to mention the challenges around bias. And this is still a great challenge that people are facing. So, again, this is a question, I guess, maybe for roundtables later on, what is going on in that kind of space. At the moment for us, it's also linking into some conversations a bit earlier, is, we're in a space that people have no idea about. You have no clue, on the street. It's at the moment, it's very interesting to look at the TV. There's some adverts talking about AI for the public, so getting people to understand a bit more about AI, to feel more comfortable around it, perhaps, and to demonstrate the opportunities. But the conversation is only just starting when actually it's gone so far already. So how do we engage individuals that have no idea? How do we, and I think I also discussed this in our last panel, how do we ensure that individuals are not left behind, that people, communities are not left behind in this race to the stars, in this race towards AI that we, that's coming, that's here, as it were, already. So just a few pins there for further conversation. Thanks.
Many thanks. So there's lots of questions being raised. I'm hoping also we can hear more examples of what are good collaborative governance that's already taken place. What are the ways in which we've struggled in the past, but then found collective solutions that will bring us closer to benevolent use of technologies? So that's something I'm adding into the mix, but I'm sure Scott's got plenty of other things he would like to bring with as well.
I'm grinning from ear to ear here. So a couple things. So on that last point, Eleanor Ostrom's work on the commons. We think of those as asset commons, but once you think of it as a risk commons, like the risk of not having fish, the risk of not having wood or grain, then you can apply to any risk. So risk commons is something to bubble up. One of the things I wanted to return to, though, is, we were once one village in the Rift Valley in Africa 200,000 years ago. And we radiated out around the world over the last 200,000 years, and we came up with different food and different music and different language, 6,531 languages, I believe, currently being spoken, different culture, all sorts of different things. The internet brought us together for show and tell. And intrinsically, what it did is we're all lazy because organisms and organizations don't want to internalize cost, internalize externalities. So we want our food or music to win. And so that's part of where we are right now. That's a beautiful setting because everyone can put their practices and their ideas on the table now. We can actually do that. And then AI gives us a computationally objective view. We've always had biases in humans looking at other human stuff and saying, no, mine is better. But now we have this other thing, this other form of intelligence, which is computational. That's one point. And last thing, if I said to you, if we're sitting in a car and I say the music is in the radio, you would say, what are you, crazy? What are you, an idiot? It's not, the music's not in the radio. The music's it's being broadcast and the radio processes it. I have the same view. I don't think the mind resides in the brain. I think the mind resides in language and material culture, and the brain processes it like a radio. If and to the extent that is useful, it doesn't mean it's exclusive of other notions. But if the mind resides in language and in culture, and AI is now evolving in that environment of the language and culture that's been generated by humans and also examining nature, then we do have a point of intervention that's it's in beyond and in addition to the brain-computer interface. It allows for an interface through language itself, rhetoric, and that's what lawyers do for a living. It's persuasive speech. How do you use speech to guide our own behaviors? And so I'm encouraging us to think about, additionally, the kind of mechanisms we used before and to bring those to bear in a system that we know is being trained on things that humans have produced. Thanks.
Many thanks. This will probably be the last round of comments, so this is the time to leave the biggest thoughts in the conversation. Ben Goertzel.
Well, I don't think I have any grand summary to present. I will answer the question who I would vote for president, Trump, Kamala Harris, or AGI. I mean, it depends on the AGI, but I'm hoping we're not going to build one that's even worse than the human alternatives. So yeah, I think that AGI and ASI help with governance of human affairs is much needed. Although I also think humans should continue to have a hand in governance of their own affairs, but more usefully than that, probably I want to comment on something that we talked about a bunch at the BGI conference as well, which is conferences and online sessions like this are certainly not enough, right? And I mean, it's great that these issues are coming to the attention of a broader group of people than they have in the past, and people are starting to think seriously about AGI governance and the path to AGI. And I think even though LLMs like Llama and ChatGPT and so on are certainly not AGIs and can't be incrementally improved to become AGIs, they've both provided some useful services and they've woken people's minds up to a whole bunch of possibilities that seemed vaguer before. So I think more people can palpably feel that AGI is near now, and more people can palpably feel the necessity for some better way to guide the emergence of AGI than, say, Sam Altman, who's a great guy, but should he really be in charge of the next thinking machine? The NSA director is now on the board of OpenAI. Not to say they're not going to do something helpful there, along with maybe less helpful things, but do we really want Sam Altman and the NSA to be in charge of the next species to emerge on this planet and to guide us beyond the human-driven realm of scarcity into an ASI-driven realm of abundance? So I think these notions are becoming much clearer to a lot more people now, but we need more than that, right? We do need collective action. And Scott said, we're not just talking about doing something, we're doing something. Well, we are doing something here, and talking is doing something. Speech actions are actions. But we need to do more than having this sort of gathering, right? I mean, we need political agitation, yes, if nothing else, to stop really dumb laws restricting AI development to be passed. We also need participation in hosting AIs, providing data to AIs, and guiding what are the value systems and what are the applications to which AI is put. So I saw somewhere floating past in the comments, there's children starving in Sudan right now. Yeah, and 60% or something like that of Ethiopian children are now brain stunted due to malnutrition, right? So I mean, there's a lot of problems right now. We could be putting early stage AGI technology to work helping solve these problems, rather than only to make money for large corporations or solve the information retrieval needs of the wealthy elite on the planet, right? So directing early stage AGI toward beneficial applications, both for the benefit of humanity and to help shape the value systems of emerging AGIs in a positive direction. So there's a lot of sorts of collective action that we need more people to be pursuing. A number of us in the SingularityNET sphere have been thinking about sort of what's the right way to pull together some sort of, global beneficial AGI collective toward pursuing these goals. I mean, this, of course, is tied in with things like OpenCog, SingularityNET, ASI Alliance, but it needs to go beyond particular technology projects of this nature also. And basically watch this space. I mean, we're going to be making more concrete efforts to recruit people into new organizations aimed at taking collective action in the directions that we've been discussing here. And this will be a big focus of the BGI 25 conference, but we need to get ball rolling before the next conference for sure.
So you heard it here. Listen out for more news coming, which can't be spoken of so clearly yet. Anneloes, what closing remarks would you make? And if the next American president invited you to spend a day with him or her, what advice would you share?
Well, maybe actually I invite them and everyone here to give your input in this participatory framework for creating an eventual global AGI constitution that Ben and I have been working on, and with input of many wonderful pioneers from SingularityNET and others from around the world. Where we're actually exploring different models, hybrid models between decentralized forms of governance and protocols that could even be implemented on the blockchain through DAO structures, decentralized autonomous organizations, where we're also proposing AGI governance as a global commons, which is a very different approach, and parenting the potential and stewarding the potential of AGI, and even envisioning what it means if AGI and ASI become new artificial forms of life, of mind, and may eventually even maybe sentience emerging from that. So We'd love to have your input in all of this and your thoughts. It's really an open and evolving document, and you can comment in the document, and then we'll be integrating that. I think Haley is putting the link in somewhere, so that would be great. She says it's posted, so that would be my concluding remark, is actually an invitation for more input and contributions, so that the way that we are co-creating governance becomes actually empowering, and it becomes rewarding for people, because I think there's a major trust factor here with governance around the world, but people have lost trust in governance. They're very skeptical of it. They don't feel that their voice matters. And I do believe, I'm always more on the positive side, but I do believe that there's an untapped potential in our collective intelligence and wisdom, but it's really up to us, each of us, to take responsibility for that potential, and then make that a truly transformative contribution now for our world, but also for future generations to come. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Gabriel, what closing remarks would you like to make? And I guess if you don't have anything else to talk about, I'd love to hear your views on the idea that bioelectricity will give us new insights into intelligence and consciousness. You referred to the work of Michael Levin. Might that cause a ripple of new insight and understanding that might even change how we develop AI?
I think it's certainly possible that it could change how we develop AI. I think my first hope is how it changes how we view ourselves, and that it was as simple as doing some work on bioelectricity and electromagnetism to get people enthusiastic about other ways that self-organizing systems evolve and new forms of intelligence may emerge in evolution. I think there's probably something that we can learn from that for AI and AGI and beyond. I think my greatest hope is that humans can sort of really square with the reality of impending AGI and ASI, do our best to cultivate what we bring to the table in the governance process that will keep evolving, and keep it participatory, and be kind of another option that's attractive from the sort of more closed off AI developments that we see that are being brought under the umbrella of national security, based upon geopolitics and that sort of thing. So I'm very enthusiastic about this kind of in inner software engineering. I think it goes a long way. It's sort of some cultures talk about preparing for death. I think that there's a great benefit to hitting that head on in advance, because there's a lot of inherent processes and learnings in aging anyway that cognitively and emotionally affect you. So there's parallels with this when there is a successor or the incumbent is moving into a new role with superintelligence on the way. So I'm excited for new forms of BCI, for potential governance, for cultivation of the most agile and nimble parts of our being that are willing to let go of preconceptions and biases and learn to swarm and swim hopefully together in the most pro-social way possible. So very, bringing in the heart is quite important, in addition to our more. And I think this group does a great job. This continues to expand. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. So encouraging all of us to find ways to be more agile, to leave aside some of our preconceptions and our rigid thinking. That's a tough ask, but I think it's a very necessary ask. We're going to hear closing remarks from Trent. And Trent, I'll maybe ask if you give some answer to Notorious Effects, who asks, how will the combined resources and expertise of PhET, SingularityNET, and ocean protocols accelerate the development of AGI, accelerate the kinds of things we've been talking about? I guess some of the audience already familiar with the merger that's taking place with the tokens, but you may have some insights to share with the community on that as well.
Sure. So maybe I'll just quickly answer that. We see it as there's a race to AGI and ASI right now, mostly by centralized powers, and having it decentralized can benefit humanity a lot, right? Multipolar system rather than just, you know, China and USA or OpenAI and a handful of other companies that have become large building this. So ideally, way more democratic access to all the technology, and that can help to help in the near term, right? And so we have several hypotheses that we are chasing towards AGI from a decentralized perspective. There's the OpenCog Hyperon approach that Ben mentioned. There's a project that I'm driving from within Ocean Protocol called Predictor, and that scaled up. Predictor is a crowdsourced time series prediction, but when you do crowdsourced time series prediction for every square kilometer on the planet, then it incentivizes for a planetary dynamical system model. And so that's a path towards that. And to build a planetary dynamic systems model will naturally be extremely intelligent on its own, and in kind of a benign way, right? It's not going to be sort of having humanish behavior. It'll have other behaviors. And we have a couple other potential directions, pillars as well. So that's some of the path towards that. And of course, we're also dovetailing approaches in the day-to-day and stuff too. Going to the panel itself, and by the way, for more information on that, just Google search ASI Alliance Vision Paper, and you'll see more details on that. In terms of this conversation about governance of AGI and ASI, so I'm Canadian, and I saw there were some Canadians in the comments. That's awesome. I love hockey. I grew up playing it. And Wayne Gretzky, you know, the greatest hockey player of all time, he said, "Don't skate to where the puck is, skate to where the puck is headed." In as soon as 6 years, the puck is headed for artificial superintelligence, silicon-based intelligences that are 1,000 times and maybe even 1,000,000 times smarter than any single human, right? And we won't be able to control those. I just don't see any feasible way. However, like I've mentioned, if we recognize that this is its own race, we can race towards human superintelligence, where we are also leveraging silicon in order to have competitive substrates with the artificial superintelligences, taking us to human superintelligence. Now, given that this is a panel on governance of AGI and ASI, in terms of where's the puck headed in 6 years, imagine Happy Path, where we actually managed to race competitively, and we as you know, as emergence next level humans that have achieved our own level of superintelligence and are interacting with these pure silicon based ASIs in 6 years or 10 years or whatever it is, what does governance look like there, right? And this, I think, is a really important and interesting question to ask. You know, how do we relate among these? Will we each be as powerful as a nation state? You know, are there going to be 100 of these? Are there going to be 10 billion of these? Are there going to be 10 trillion of these? Whatever, right? And the constraints will likely be around compute resources. And that's why there will be a continual push towards, you know, 10x more compute and Dyson spheres around the sun and all this, compute energy, all this stuff, right? But yeah, so to summarize, ASI is happening in as soon as 6 years. We need HSI to happen in order for humanity to play any role in the future. And governance, emergent governance around the interactions of ASI entities and HSI entities will be a highly important topic, and we should be starting to talk about that sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you. Skate to where the puck is going. Elizabeth, where are you skating to?
Hi. Someone in the chat, well, first off, lots of love and blessings to everyone here, just responding to someone in the chat. And also there was mention that there's someone, a tribesman out, you know, in the Serengeti somewhere that hasn't got a clue about AI whatsoever. And so it's really very important for us to think about what, you know, education, outreach, you know, how are we going to develop beneficial or have beneficial general intelligence developed without some engagement, full engagement with everyone on this planet, in, you know, and bringing their insights into, you know, what we're purporting to actually drive out with our governance and communications and outreach and reporting, and all those various different aspects that are so very important. So, how do we do that? For us, it's not really only about bringing experts together, because we can be a sounding board to each other, and we're going around with, some kind of considerations and stretching ourselves and moving forward, but we're leaving people behind. So we do like to bring in individuals that have no idea, because of course that is also going to inform how we develop these technologies, how we think about our ethical stance, and moving forward. So we bring together individuals that and different generations to have conversations and then think about, well, what next? And that what next is driven by community, and that's really important. Again, like I said before, I don't have all the answers. There's so much change coming, and it's moving really fast. We talk about the challenges around the regulation keeping up with what's going on. So I think to round up and end, what I'll say is that everyone has a voice here. Everyone has a perspective. Everyone's perspective is very important, is necessary, is important, and should drive what we're doing. And so the question is, how do we engage that? How do we open up? And what you've suggested as well, having the global kind of community and drive and input into documentation is definitely one way of doing that. So thank you very much for inviting me to have part of this conversation, and I'd like to input where I can. Thank you.
Many thanks, Elizabeth. Your input is absolutely welcome.
Thank you.
Scott, any final comments?
Yeah, just that. Thank you for inviting me. This is terrific. I go back to the idea of eukaryotes and that kind of biophysics of governance, and our ability to combine and engage in, it's not symbiogenesis, but sim-infogenesis, perhaps, with other forms of intelligence, and to understand that the only path forward that's sustainable is going to be one that integrates those different forms. We're doing that here. We'll be doing that at the conference next week. And I really look forward to us thinking together so that we can really manifest nothing's ever going to be perfect, nor should we try for perfect, but the most acceptable and sustainable positions on resource allocation and other allocations going forward for not just our species, but life in general, all negentropic forms. So it starts getting big, but the only way to do it is to do it together. So thank you for inviting me to the seed crystal of that phase change here today. Appreciate it.
The only way to do this is to do this together. Fantastic. Gabriel, I'll give you a final words, because one of the things we can all do next is to learn from key books that cover some of this ground, and I believe you are aware of a book that covers some of this material in more length. Gabriel.
Yes, thank you. So Ben and I recently this summer just published a new book called The Consciousness Explosion, which we started in circa 2020 or so. And it's basically really looking at this theme of, human intelligence, but the less explored forms, and how will AGI and ASI herald new forms of cognition and states of consciousness, and how can we best prepare ourselves for this new era? So really, as it was said before, cultivating HSI, human superintelligence. So there's a sort of inner perspective of how one can best prepare before the actual technologies come on board. And, even contemplating themes of what's it like to be an early adopter of these technologies, and how long do you wait before taking them on? So it's an exciting book. It's got great visuals, a lot of different topics. There's a complimentary PDF copy you can grab on the consciousnessexplosion.ai. There will be a link posted. Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Well, now that we've heard from these amazing panelists, I encourage everyone to join one of the community roundtables, where you can dive deeper into the conversation, offering your own vision, perspective, questions, and comments. Thanks very much to all the panelists, and thanks to you, the audience, for contributing so much to this conversation too. And look out for more from SingularityNET and its partners in this progress to build